Everyone wants to raise money from investors, but most people have no idea what they're doing and they often get ghosted and said no to. So we want to make sure that we are helping you build a financial forecast and a pitch deck that is going to increase your chances of getting investment and getting into accelerators. We constantly hear headlines about how someone created a pitch deck that raised millions and millions of dollars. That's the power of a good pitch deck. But don't get fooled by the headlines. It's not the only thing. You have to have some substance behind it. In this video, we're going to be talking about how you can build an amazing pitch deck and financial forecast so that you can increase your chances of getting into accelerator programs and get investment. What's up, everyone? Christian Peverelli here in my startup studio. I am the co-founder of We Are No Code. We teach entrepreneurs how to build startups without coding. Now, if this is the first time on the channel, please like, subscribe, slam that bell as well. It really helps us to grow and it helps us to continue to do what we do for you, to create tips, tricks, and make sure you don't make the same mistakes as the last generation of entrepreneurs. Awesome. Now let's jump into pitch decks and financial forecasts. Now, the first path you have as a founder is to completely bootstrap your startup. Now, bootstrapping means that you do not take money from any external sources. You simply work with the revenue that you have to grow your business organically, and there are loads of benefits in that. The other option that you have is to get into an investing accelerator program like Techstars, Y Combinator, 500 Startups, and there are pretty much thousands of other accelerators out there that invest. Those will provide a huge amount of support, of mentorship, and also a little bit of cash and usually some credits and discounts as well. Now, an important thing to understand about these is that they usually accept between 1 and 1.5% of all applicants. So the chances of getting in are a little bit low, but if you've done the work and if you have revenue, you are in the top 10%. And accelerators are also going to help you if you are trying to raise money, which is the third path. Now, before we get too deep into that rabbit hole, I wanted to talk about pitching and financial forecast, how we can create a great pitch that's going to attract investors and get you into accelerator programs. So first of all, there's a difference between a pitch and a pitch deck. A pitch deck is a slideshow, essentially, or a slide deck that is essentially going to allow you to pitch to investors, and you may be in the room, you may not be in the room. Now, there's a difference between a pitch deck, which is essentially a slide deck, and a pitch, right? A pitch is literally just getting in front of people and pitching. Now, let's talk about a couple formats of pitches. The first one is the one-liner, which we talked about a little bit earlier in this program. And it essentially is a way to talk about your company in one line, right? It speaks for itself. But the second one is the 30-second pitch. Now, this usually is the one-liner followed by fireworks. Now, what are fireworks? These are just impressive things about your company that show that you are on the right path to success. So they may be the amount of traction that you have or the amount of revenue that you have. It might be something linked to the founder or the team. So for example, if the team has prior worked together and they've been successful, or if there's a serial entrepreneur, or potentially, and this was an example of one of the founders that I trained, Heidi, who essentially was the top cited researcher in this field. That brings a lot of credibility to the startup that you're building if it's in that same field as well. So you really want to bring out just a couple of big fireworks that show that you're doing a great job. Anything that's impressive about your company. Now, the 30-second pitch is pretty much what you're going to use for any given investor if you meet them at a conference or in a casual setting, or at a cocktail party when you're talking to business people about what you're building. Now, the third format is the 3-minute pitch, which could be also a 5-minute pitch. It could be a 10-minute pitch, and it could even be longer if need be. Now, it's really only for the 3-minute pitch and beyond that we're going to be using a deck. And there are really two types of decks. One is a presentation deck. So that's a deck that you're going to be presenting with in front of people. You're going to be in the room as you're presenting this story, and everything that you have behind you or on your deck is going to just be supporting information. Now, the second one is the sendable deck. This is a deck that oftentimes you are asked for from an investor before even getting a meeting. And by the way, these are decks that are going to be shared from those investors to other trusted people. It has to be able to communicate without you in the room. So you have to have a narrative throughout the different slides that really explains from start to finish and tells a story. So two different types of decks. as you can imagine, a little bit more writing on the sendable deck and a lot less on the presentation deck. Now, don't forget the importance of a deck in general is just about getting the next meeting or getting the first meeting. And so remember, the goal here is not at all to communicate all the information. You really want to get people to understand what you do, why it's a little bit different, sort of your special sauce, and also build up some intrigue so that they're willing to take that next meeting. Awesome. Now that we're done with that, let's talk about the structure of a classic pitch deck. So there are usually about between 10 and 15 slides, but there are 10 main slides that you really want to have as part of your deck. The first one is the title page, right? Where you're really briefly going to introduce yourself and have a one-liner around what your company does. Now, after that, we're going to have the problem where we introduce that problem. This next slide is going to be a solution. After that, we might have a product slide and introduce the special sauce that that product is delivering, but also how that product actually works to deliver the value that solves the problem. After that, and because we're talking to people who want to make money by investing in your company, we're going to talk about the business model. So here we're going to talk about how we actually specifically make money. And you don't want to have lots of different business models. You want to have one. Now, once people know how you make money, they next want to know how big is this market? How big is this opportunity, in other words? And here there are probably the most mistakes that people ever make. We'll talk about it in a second. Once they know how big the opportunity is, they want to know how you're going to capture that opportunity. So we're going to talk about go-to-market strategy, how you're going to acquire these customers. And you already are acquiring customers, so you should really talk a little bit more from experience here of what is already working, hopefully. After that, we'll be doing a competitive analysis and explaining the competitive advantage that you have, followed by talking about the traction or revenue that you have in the company. Then we're going to want to present a team slide, and finally a financial forecast slide where we're going to show how those numbers add up and what our predictions are for where we will be in a handful of years. Now, oftentimes at the very end, people talk about how much they're raising, what milestones they're also going to reach, but that's essentially the basic structure of a pitch deck. You have to remember that when you are pitching, there are really two sides to things. There's all the things I've just mentioned, which are kind of what I call the technical side of a pitch deck, right? But then once you've really nailed down the things that you are saying, you also want to start dipping a little bit more in the storytelling and in presenting that information in an appealing way through emotional connection, right? So if you're someone who faced that problem, you might have a story about yourself, or you might have a story about one of your customers who was delighted with your product once they finally used it. It's it's an art. So at first you want to focus more on the technical side of what you're presenting in terms of information. And then you want to make sure that it's all tied together nicely with some emotional hooks and a storyline. Okay, I want to talk about a couple of slides right now that people really get wrong. Now, the market size slide is a problematic slide in general. Oftentimes, the way people approach this is to say, hey, it's a $20 billion industry. I plan on getting 1% of that industry. Look, I'm going to be rich. It's called the top-down approach. Now, we don't want to take that approach because it's not at all credible, and investors have a real consensus around this, so you don't want to present something like that. What you want to do is show that you understand how your business model will play out in time, right? So market size and the bottoms up approach is really about saying, hey, we're able to make $20 per customer. This is our specific customer. This is the number of customers there are in the geographic region that I'm targeting. So you may start off with the US, you may start off with your state, you may start off with a city. And essentially you want to show how that plays out into making money over time versus just saying, oh yeah, there's like a market and I'll get a percentage of that market. And what it really does is that it shows that you have an understanding of how to enter the market, and it's credible, and it shows that you're already doing it. It's not flimsy. So that's really the kind of stuff that's going to pull up red flags if we do it the top-down approach. Now, for the business model slide, make sure not to have loads of different business models, right? You want to say, if you are a subscription service, then just be a subscription service. You don't have to talk about the fact that later on you're going to do all these other things as well. The more simple you can keep your business model, the better. Now, for example, if we use the example of Airbnb, let's say you take a 10% commission on each transaction. Then you also want to say, well, what is your average transaction size? Now, how many transactions do you expect to have over X amount of years? And that'll obviously give you a number of revenue that you're going to be able to make from those sales. And so that's going to be able to tell you how much you're going to make from X amount of transactions over X amount of years. It's much more clear and people can actually add it up in their own heads. Now, when talking about your product, you want to get quite specific about how you do what you do. And then what does it do? Like, how does it deliver that value? Using jargon here like AI, blockchain, this, that, the other, it's not really going to be useful. People are not going to take you seriously. Of course, you can mention those words if you are building things with those kind of features, but more importantly, they understand that you might not be there yet, specifically if you're raising your first round of investment. So be careful in the way that you do that, because these individuals who are institutional investors really know how to suss out people who don't really know what they're talking about. Another slide is the team slide. Now, here you really want to just show that you have the capabilities between you and your co-founders to cover the main things that you need in the business, right? So oftentimes you're going to see things like CTO, COO, CEO, and those are useful, but they don't really tell you what the responsibilities of that individual is, right? So you just want to make sure that you have a well-rounded team and that you express that as you're talking to these individuals. Now, a very important thing when it comes to the deck and pitching is to understand that you need to really break this down for dummies. You need to be able to explain and pitch in front of an audience who is not going to be your target audience. The reason for that is because it's very unlikely that at first you're going to be pitching in front of the perfect investors for you who understand this market excellently. So we're going to treat it like a funnel. We need most of the world to be able to understand what we do so that people can start presenting us to other people who are more qualified and who know the topic. The great thing is that if you're able to get everyone to understand what you do, it's going to be easier to commercialize that product, and that's something that's important for the investor, right? But also, it's going to be much easier for you to jump into the deeper questions for someone who is really smart and understands it, but also you'll be able to get interest from people who are less knowledgeable about that field. And that actually is important because there's a whole segment called angel investors who may not be really deep into your industry, but have disposable income and might be interested in investing a little bit in your company. So we really want to shoot wide, which means that the presentation and the way that we deliver it is going to be something that everyone can really understand. Now, very importantly, you want to practice, and fine tune. People will ask you the same questions over and over. And what your job is to use those sort of objections or those questions and integrate them back into your pitch so that hopefully you are really good at presenting in a way that people capture the information, the key information you need them to know to be able to either invest in your company or be interested in the next meeting, or to be able to introduce you to someone who might be willing to. Another thing is design. There are so many tools that you can use to design this, but if you find a designer, then make sure that you're only doing it for the final iteration, because you're constantly going to have to adapt your deck and you want to have control over that. So there are templates that you can use that are already out there. There are companies like Prezi that allow you to create nicely designed decks without having to be a designer. And if we want to create some custom design, make sure to do that at the end when we figured out the rest and we know exactly what it is we need to design as a final product. If not, trust me, you're going to be spending so much money with designers, and that's not what we want you to do at this stage. Let's now talk about the financial forecast. Now, the financial forecast is essentially a 3 to 5 year forecast of how your revenue or your business model is going to grow throughout that period of time to show how much you intend to capture of the market over that period. Now, the one thing that people know about these financial forecasts is that they're going to be wrong. Every single investor knows it, and what they're interested in is just knowing that you're able to create a credible financial forecast that really reflects your understanding of the market. And there are a couple elements to that financial forecast. Now, the first one is the profit and loss statement, or the P&L. It's literally just every single line of the revenues, every single line of the costs broken down, and when throughout the time period you're hiring X person, which means that you add an additional cost that goes out in time. And you really just want to be very smart about the way you do this. And when I say smart, I mean we want to create some core assumptions that are based on well-justified numbers we may have. So you might have a number that's an industry number around how much a product manager makes. Great, leveraging a platform like Glassdoor where you can see those kind of figures. So that's potentially the number that you're going to use for the cost of one of those people throughout time. So Your assumptions are going to be important in showing that you've done some of your homework in terms of how much some of these things will cost, right? Depending on what state you're in, there might be a different tax level. So you want to really know all of these different things. And when we're creating assumptions around revenue, there are going to be figures, for example, like if we know that out of 100 people who land on X page, we get a 2% conversion rate, because that's already what we're doing, that number is going to be really powerful in showing how that might be able to scale out in time. Now, again, we really just want to make this credible, and there are awesome templates that you can leverage that I have posted right below. Some of them are free, some of them you can pay for, just a small cost, but it's going to help you to understand the structure of these decks and allow you to create yours specifically. Now, another element is the cash flow analysis. This is basically your cash flow at any given time, right? If you get to zero in the bank, you are out of business, right? So we want to make sure to include a section with that as well. Now, a little tip is also to understand your unit economics in selling one item, right? There are loads of terms like CAC, cost of acquisition, essentially of a new customer, and LTV, which is the lifetime value of a customer. Now, of course, if how much it costs to acquire a customer is lower than the lifetime value we can get from a customer, then what that means is that we have a business that might be profitable. If not, we're in trouble, right? And you have to understand these unit economics that you have within how much it costs you to produce something, how much your margin is on that, which could be a gross margin, how much profit you're able to make from one of those as well. So there's lots of different things that you want to understand within your business, and that really just comes down to creating a credible financial forecast. So below, I posted a couple of examples. You can just check them out. Now, everything that I've just said up until now is completely useless unless you've built a business and have revenue. Creating a financial forecast and a pitch deck is completely useless. So check out these two videos where we teach you how to go from zero to startup. We have a full program. You can click below as well and get access to that free course on how to build a startup as a non-technical entrepreneur. Hope this was useful. See you in the next video. Take care, my friends. Okay, now the